And we're discussing, of course, that big bilateral meeting that has taken place between Prime Minister Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping. In fact, those pictures coming in ahead of the dinner and the family photo that took place where the Prime Minister was greeted by Xi Jinping over there in Tianjin. What really are the implications of this? Statements coming in from both India and China following that bilateral meeting. To analyze that, we have with us Ashok Kantha, who's a former ambassador of India to China. Thank you so much, Mr. Kantha, for joining us. First up, let me begin by asking you, how do you view the bilateral meeting between the Prime Minister as well as the Chinese President on the sidelines of SCO? What are the most significant takeaways from India's perspective in your view, sir?
Well, clearly it was a substantive meeting, which we understand lasted for more than an hour. There are no signals coming from our statement which indicate that we would like to accelerate the process of rebuilding of relations between India and China, which commenced when Prime Minister met with President Xi in Kazan in October last year. There is a reference to India and China being developmental partners rather than rivals, something which we had not seen for some time. There is also, this statement made by Prime Minister that we should not look at relations through prism of third countries. There's reaffirmation of certain, agreements reached when a National Security Advisor met with Foreign Minister Wang Yi a short time ago in New Delhi in their capacity as special representatives on boundary question. And on developmental issue, there is this interesting formulation that we need to look at trade and investment ties and reduction of trade deficit proceeding from overall relations from a strategic perspective. On the whole, I get the impression that a dual track approach is being maintained. While we would like to see further progress on border-related issues, we are also prepared to impart greater momentum to people-centric contacts as also economic engagement with China.
Right.
And one important thing which I would like to highlight, reference in the MEA statement to a separate meeting Prime Minister had with Tsai Chi. Now, Tai Chi is like Chief of Staff of President Xi. He is the fifth ranking official in the hierarchy of Communist Party of China. And the separate meeting, suggests that I think the more is happening in rebuilding relations than what meets the eyes. It's a very unusual meeting. Prime Minister normally doesn't have a separate meeting with the person who is not his counterpart on the margins of a multilateral conference.
More to it than meets the eye. Perhaps that's a very interesting insight, sir. Thanks so much for pointing that out. But let me ask you, go specifically to some of the points that you mentioned. Now, both sides in their statements have referenced peace and stability along the border. How will this consensus on border management really work? Because we've heard a similar statement of an early harvest when Wang Yi came to New Delhi as well. How do we see things going forward from here?
There are two distinct issues there. One question of management of border, which essentially requires ensuring peace and tranquility in border areas. I'm happy that our Prime Minister reiterated that for continued development relations, we must have peace and tranquility in border areas. That's a basic position we have taken. Chinese earlier did quite subscribe to that, but we have maintained that. Now, when special representatives met, they decided to, accelerate the process of de-escalation of troops, on which there has not been any movement so far. So let's hope that will progress. In parallel, there was understanding on early harvest on the boundary question. Now, that's something a little puzzling to people like me, because, earlier when China had suggested early harvest on boundary settlement, they had the Sikkim sector in mind, that we should, sort of reach a separate understanding on Sikkim sector, which we had not accepted because, what we had agreed, both countries agreed in 2005 in agreement political parameters and guiding principles provides for a package settlement. So we're not quite interested in piecemeal settlement, especially limited to Sikkim sector. There are reasons why we didn't want to do that. I don't want to elaborate on that. So one would like to understand what is the scope of early harvest we are talking about and why, we are sort of revising our stance on that issue, which we had taken earlier after very careful deliberation.
Right. Also, Mr. Kantha, the larger question is this, that, while these, of course, are welcome, ties in terms of people-to-people contact, you're going to have direct flights happening, the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra will resume, but there are fundamental questions, and it's not just about Galwan. There are, for instance, we all know during Operation Sindoor, the role that China has played in aiding Pakistan, apart from arming and equipping their defense forces. How will these fundamental issues be resolved between the two nations, in your view?
That's why, you're absolutely right to raise those issues. That's why, when we say that we are developmental partners or not rivals, sometimes that's not matched by Chinese actions on ground. You referred to what happened during the 4-day conflict. We had with Pakistan, a level of support which was given by China to Pakistan amounted to battlefield collusion. That was unprecedented. Then we have this huge dam coming up in our immediate vicinity, which will be 3 times the size of Three Gorges project, largest in the world at present. Again, that's something which has been undertaken without any prior consultation with us. We had recent examples of China weaponizing dependencies. We have imports from that country, whether it be rare earth magnets or fertilizers or tunnel boring machines. Even if those things are resumed, those exports are resumed, I think our vulnerabilities have been made clear to us. So how do we manage, these and other defense difficulties? I think we cannot, disregard these objective realities when we talk in terms of improvement to relations. Improvement should be calibrated improvement. It's far too premature to talk about a reset in ties unless and until Chinese side is more responsive on those issues that you referred to.
Right. And also, sir, I would like to ask you, there's been a lot of speculation, a lot of talk about the revival of RIC with this particular meeting. Of course, there's a bilateral that we've seen with Xi Jinping, and tomorrow President Putin will also be meeting Prime Minister Modi. How realistic is that? And is this repositioning that, of course, although the government in its own statement says it has nothing to do with any third country, but there will be analysis linking it to what has happened in the recent past with the statements coming in from senior officials of the United States government in reference, of course, to the tariffs that have been imposed. How do you see all of this playing out?
RIC as a platform, I've been involved with that earlier when I was in diplomatic service in Track 1 capacity and subsequently in Track 2 capacity as part of a think tank community. Frankly, it has not been a very productive platform. We are unable to find, much scope for working together for a variety of reasons. I don't want to go into that. Apart from efficacy of RIC, if it conveys a signal that somehow, India is coming together with Russia and China as an offset to its problems with the USA, deficit we have with USA, I think that will be counterproductive. That will not be helpful at all. Our relations with Russia are very important. It's a strategic partnership. We must invest in that. Likewise, we need to move towards a stable, predictable, and constructive relationship with China as Prime Minister told, the Foreign Minister Wang Yi when he was in New Delhi recently. But India working with Russia and China in a trilateral setting to deal with some of these larger issues, frankly, I don't think that's going to be really helpful or productive at this point of time.
Right, because the larger question is this, then what really is our strategy, given the fact that President Trump has dug in his heels, there's a 50% tariff, and of course we don't know what's going to happen in the future, whether there is some softening that happens from the US's side, etc. But the question is this, that this warming up or thawing as far as ties with China are concerned, that is not going to guarantee India access to China's market either, because it's notoriously protectionist, as we know, and some of the biggest US corporations, tech corporations, etc., don't have access to China. So what is the possibility that India would be able to increase its trade and the balance of trade also, with China is hugely tilted one way towards China's side? How do you look at that aspect?
You're absolutely right. In fact, Prime Minister clearly flagged this issue of trade deficit when he spoke to President Xi earlier today. It's a major concern. It's a major concern because our exports to China are in fact declining rather than increasing, while our imports are growing steadily. And equally important, we have developed very unhealthy dependencies on critical imports from China. And given China's proclivity to weaponize those dependencies, it's a matter of concern to us. Besides, even when it comes to trade and investment leaks, I think we have to be realistic. Is China really going to set up manufacturing capabilities in India by sharing technology or bringing in investment in areas of interest to us? We should explore that, but we should not be overly optimistic on that count. Clearly, Chinese market will not compensate for any lack of access to US market because of increased US tariffs. Because our experience has been that there are all kind of non-tariff barriers in Chinese market. Even products and services where we are globally competitive, like pharmaceuticals, we are known as pharmacy of the world. We have been unable to make any dent into Chinese market, or IT sector. Again, despite our global success, Chinese market eluded us. So let's work on them, those areas. Let's work on getting better access to Chinese market. But I don't think Chinese market, though it's China is the largest trading nation in the world, but for us, it's not going to compensate for reduced access to US market.
Right. And also we've seen both leaders talking about a joint responsibility to uphold multilateralism, working towards peace and prosperity in Asia globally. How do you see India and China collaborating more effectively on these international platforms amidst these bilateral differences?
There are some issues where we can find convergent agenda, and we have done in the past. Climate change, for instance, we have worked together, though level of intensity of cooperation has come down. On some WTO related issues, we worked together. But China, the way they look at these issues, unfortunately, they have been quite ready to side deals, as we saw during the run-up to Paris Agreement in 2015. They did a side deal with USA. Again, they are talking about coming together to oppose unilateral bullying. But we are aware of the fact that China and USA are engaged in very serious negotiations. And we won't be surprised if that results in a substantive agreement between those two countries, which is fine. We have no problem with that. But expecting that, our difficulties with USA can be addressed by, sort of joining hand with China, or even finding some answers in SCO setting, for instance, I don't think that's going to happen.
Right. We've seen how President Putin has been emphasizing on the need to de-dollarize. Now, this is something which, has the United States, particularly we've seen statements of President Trump on this. Is this at all a practical sort of a suggestion coming in from Russia? Of course, we've seen countries like Russia and Iran who've suffered, at the hand of sanctions coming in from the United States. But do you think that such calls would be acceptable to other members, other BRICS nations, for instance?
No, we have made it abundantly clear that we are not interested in any agenda of de-dollarization, despite all problems. And we do have concerns about USA is sort of weaponizing its pole position in the global financial market. We do have difficulties with that. But US dollar remains the reserve currency at this stage. There is no substitute to that. I don't think there is any realistic possibility of developing a BRICS currency. Renminbi, as you know, is not fully convertible. China is not yet a fully, market economy. So RMB can also play a relatively limited role as the international currency. So we have to live with US dollar as the reserve currency in global financial markets. And while we are interested in looking at bilateral, payment mechanisms which provide alternative, we are not. I don't think India is pursuing any de-dollarization agenda.
Right. And also, Mr. Kantha, are you attaching a lot of importance to the fact that there are reports that President Trump is not going to be attending the Quad that was scheduled to be held in India later this year? And what really does this mean for the Quad grouping? Because India has invested a lot in the Quad. If meetings are being cancelled in the manner that they are, is it just a reflection of the ties between India and US in its current form? And do you think, going forward, how do you see Quad playing an important role?
There's no doubt about the fact that India-US relations are going through a period of exceptional stress. This relationship which has moved in a positive trajectory, positive direction for nearly 25 years. But of late, we have seen, negative signals coming from USA, pronouncements made not only by President Trump, but some of his senior officials, which are most objectionable. The way tariffs have been imposed is unjust and unfair. Now, if there is this kind of stress in India-US relations, clearly this will impact on the Quad process as well. So I'm not surprised that President Trump may not come to India for a Quad summit later this year. I think we need to sort of try and find answers to problems in our relations with USA. Two countries, India and USA, will have to work seriously on that. And then, Quad process can be brought back on track. It remains an important platform. But at this stage, expecting that there can be a meaningful Quad summit hosted by India clearly is not a very realistic option.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Ashok Kantha, for very diplomatically answering that question. And of course, it's been very informative as well talking to you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us with your perspective.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much.